Good morning, boys and girls. I trust that you're well. I trust that you're nice and warm, even though it's getting really cold right now. And today we carry on with the story of God's great big story. So we've been looking from the beginning of Genesis all the way through. As we go through the Bible, we will discover that God has this great, awesome plan for mankind, and it involves so many different people along the way. And today we get to see right in the beginning of God's word in the book of Exodus, which is the second book in the Bible, we get to hear about this man called Moses. Now, I know you already know that Moses is the one whose life was saved. Pharaoh was busy killing the babies, and Moses' mother took Moses, put him into a little basket, pushed it out into the Nile River, and he was rescued. And then when Pharaoh's daughter saw this baby, she instantly liked him and said to him, "Oh, I want to raise him as my own." And so she was able to do that. And Moses became an Egyptian. Now, Egyptian means that he had his hair cut in a certain way, he wore certain clothing, and on the outside, if you looked at him, you would think that he is an Egyptian. In the meantime, he was actually still an Israelite. And the Bible tells us that in Exodus chapter 2 that Moses goes out and he watches the Israelites working. He watches his countrymen because he's still at heart an Israelite, even though on the outside he looks like an Egyptian. And even though he's been raised in Pharaoh's courts as a son of Pharaoh, imagine that, he still sees himself as being an Israelite. Now, before we go too far in this story, I've got a question to ask you. Have you ever got so mad that you wanted to do something that you knew wasn't right, but it just felt so good? Let me give you an example. Let's say, for example, you're on the playground and somebody says something really nasty to you. And you think to yourself, you know what? An eye for an eye, a mouth for a mouth, hands for hands. In other words, if you can say those nasty things to me, I can also say nasty things to you. In fact, I'm going to beat you at being nasty. And so you shout out these words, and you know in your heart of hearts that it is wrong. It's not pleasing to God, but you still do it. I wonder how many of you have done something like that. Maybe it's your brother or sister at home. Maybe they've actually bullied you or pushed you in a corner, and your only way out, you feel, is to smack them, give them what they call a snort clap, give them a nice big smack. Maybe it's a punch or two. Maybe it's something like that you know is wrong. You've been taught about this at home. At kids' church, you've been taught about it, but you still feel in the moment that you want to do something. And so you do something that you know later on you might regret, or you know is actually wrong. I want to give you an example of something that I did when I was probably your age. My brother and I were in the bedroom. We were busy drawing. I was drawing with crayon all over the walls in our bedroom. And my brother was sitting right next to me, and he was younger than me. And he was watching, and his eyes were like this big. He couldn't believe what I was doing. And I was drawing pictures. Probably weren't even good pictures, but all over this white wall. My mom was in the kitchen making supper, and she shouted out, "Boys, are you okay?" And we said, "Yes, Mom, we're having lots of fun." And my brother didn't shout anything because he was still in shock. He couldn't believe what I was doing. And my mom carried on making supper, and at some point she said to herself, "It's very quiet in that room." And normally when it's quiet, something's happening. So she came down the passage, said, I'm coming to check up on you guys. And as she was walking down the passage, I took the crayon from my hand and I put it into my brother's and I asked him to hold it for me. As my mom came into the room, she looked across. She was shocked. The room was full of these crayon drawings and all the rest. How is she going to get it off the wall? This was horrible. Artwork all over her clean walls. And she looked at the two of us, and I looked at her and I said, "It's not me, it's him. Look, he's got the crayon in his hand. He's the guilty one." And he looked at me like, "What have you just done? How do I get out of this? Here's the evidence in my hand." And the more he tried to claim that he was innocent, the more I was telling my mom that he was guilty. And my mom said, "Wait till Dad gets home. Then you'll get a good smack on your bottom." Now, I knew in that moment I should never have done that. I know in that moment I was protecting myself. I know in that moment I was doing something and passing the blame and hoping that nobody would notice. Now that's wrong. Sometimes we do things that we regret. In Moses' case, he's watching the Israelites working out in the fields, and he sees an Egyptian mistreating, harshly treating one of the Israelites. And what he then does is he attacks this Egyptian, which was against the law. I mean, the Egyptians were ruling the country at that time. He grabs this man when he thinks nobody is watching, and he beats him up, and in fact he kills him, and he hides his body away. And he thinks to himself, you know what? This man deserves it. This man did something that was horrible. He should never have beaten up that Israelite. I am allowed to do what I just did. And he takes the body and he hides the body in a way so that nobody can see. And he walks away thinking to himself, he's done, maybe not, he knows in his heart of hearts he did the wrong thing, but he thinks to himself, well, maybe it's okay, because he stopped this cruel treatment of the Israelites. A day later, Moses is watching the people again, his fellow Israelites. And he sees two of them fight. And he comes between them to try and separate them. And they turn around to him and they say to him, are you going to treat us the same way? Are you also going to kill us like you killed the Egyptian? In other words, Moses' secret was not a secret. People knew what he had done to this Egyptian. Moses knew immediately that if they knew, others knew, and that he was now an outlaw. He had broken the law. And even though he lived in Pharaoh's courts, he would be punished, even put to death for the way that he treated this Egyptian. And so he escapes from Egypt. He leaves behind Pharaoh's courts. He leaves behind all those riches and all the things that he was used to. And he flees and he goes to a place called Midian, which is out in the desert. He flees away from Egypt. Sometimes there are consequences to our behavior. And sometimes when we think we've got away with things, we know that God is watching all the time. We know that he sees everything that we do. And even more importantly, he knows every thought that goes around in our minds. So it's quite important that we actually think about what we're thinking and control our thoughts, control our actions, because God is aware of all these things. The wonderful thing about this story is that it doesn't end here. Moses moves off and he leaves Egypt and he spends time away from home. And while he's away from home, God is actually preparing him for the next big task. And that task wouldn't just be to free one Israelite from the cruel treatment of his master, but to set the nation of Israel free from the cruel ruling of the Egyptians. So our story today is found in, and I'm just going to quickly tell you where it's found. It's found in Exodus chapter 2. You can read it from verse 12 all the way through to the end of the chapter. And there you will read more about what I've told you. I've left little bits and pieces out so that you can read it and get more excited about it as you read the story. But that's our story today. Moses escaping into the desert. What's amazing is that you do not want to miss the next story. Because in this desert place where Moses is, where he thinks his life has been forgotten, where he's had to turn his back on the Egyptians, where he's had to go and reestablish himself somewhere else, go somewhere else and start anew, God has been watching him the whole time, and God approaches him in a very special way. So don't miss out on next week's story.